So good morning, everyone, and welcome to our colloquy for week 3. As usual, we're going to break it into two. The first one is going to cover chapter 29, Tumba, and the next colloquy on Thursday is going to be on chapter 30, which will be, of course, on criminal law. Let's first start by just a short clip from this movie, and we'll just use it as our starting point for discussions.
That day on the subway, what did I say to you? What were my words to you? Maybe it was your time to lose.
Okay, let's start again. Sorry.
That day on the subway, what did I say to you? What were my words to you? Maybe it was your time to lose. You didn't think so. Lose? I don't lose! I win! I win! I'm a lawyer! That's my job! That's what I do! I rest my case. Vanity is definitely my favorite sin. Kevin, it's so basic. Self-love, the all-natural opiate.
Okay. So let's just use that as our starting point. What does this clip talk about? What's the story here? Of course, you don't need to know the movie, but here's two people talking.
This is revolution, Kevin.
Oh.
Viva la causa!
It happened in Monterey.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. I win. That's my job. That's what I do. What's happening between these two persons?
Looks like well, if you ask me, that sounds like he's trying to get everything best. He's just doing this to win. He's not actually doing it for justice. He's just doing it to...
Yeah, thank you for that. What were they talking about? Thank you. I'm asking everybody, not just you. What were they talking about? They mentioned something called vanity. Yeah? Favorite sin. Is vanity against the law? No. Okay. So, is it ethical? No. Okay. Why do you think it's unethical? Before we start talking about what ethics is, why do people say that vanity, some consider it one of the 7 deadly sins? Why do you think it is a sin? Why do you think it's unethical? What's wrong with vanity? He wants to win. He wants to win all the time. What's wrong with that?
Sometimes you have to do... I don't know, sometimes you have to maybe do some unethical stuff to win sometimes.
Okay.
Stuff you know isn't right.
But let's give someone else the chance to say something. Yes?
You can't be impartial. Really impartial.
Okay. If you want to win all the time. Okay. What's wrong with vanity again? So you're not being you're being impartial or not being impartial? Okay. Not being okay. So it's self-interest. Okay. What else? Is self-interest illegal? Sometimes? Okay, sometimes. Why do you think vanity is not illegal? Why is there no tort or crime against vanity? Okay, park that thought and let's talk a little bit more about this interaction between ethics and law. So this is our chapter 29. And it takes us through ethics in the business context. Okay, the first thing is, what's the connection between ethics and business? So my area of expertise actually is called law and economics, which means that you analyze legal systems based on economic criteria. In particular, this criterion of efficiency. So you say that what should be legal or illegal should be decided on what's efficient and not efficient. And there was an economist in the Chicago Law School, Milton Friedman, who somehow was able to get the attention of President Reagan back in the 1980s. And the Chicago School said that ethics is not important for business. The bottom line is that you need to make money. You need to make money for your shareholders, and you need to make sure that you increase the value of your shares. So this was almost 50 years ago. Later on, we realized that there are different costs associated with acting unethically. And this Chicago School approach basically did not incorporate those costs. Okay? So now we realize that in fact if you act ethically, that would in fact increase your bottom line, improve your bottom line because of other benefits such as public confidence. Let's take an example. Has anyone heard of sweatshops? Yeah, sweatshops all over Asia.
That's what sells clothes, don't they?
And you've heard about iconic brands, for example, Nike, using sweatshops. Why? So that they can reduce their costs and increase their profits.
That causes an unethical social issue because it's exploiting cheap labor in third world countries, right?
Correct. Exploring cheap labor, exploring children, child labor, but in order for them to make more profit, increase their returns to their shareholders. So this is the idea of acting unethically. What is the problem with that? You act unethically, so what? Yes?
Well, if people find out about this unethical misuse of the way they're making their products, people will stop buying from the company because they don't like what they're doing.
So there's a backlash. People would not want to associate themselves with that brand because that brand stands for things like unethical behavior in terms of child abuse or in terms of unfair wages to labor in third world countries. So this is what we're talking about. If people find out, you will actually lose market share because of that behavior. All right. Before we leave this slide, let's look at the difference between ethics and morality. As it says here, acting ethically involves acting in a morally correct and honorable way. The way to think about this is that one of them is an extrinsic or external standard, and the other is an internal one. So when we talk about morals, we're talking about your individual views of right and wrong. Let's touch upon a sensitive issue for a while. Same-sex marriage. Or let's start somewhere else first. Sodomy. Has anyone heard of the word sodomy? Okay, do you know what it means? It's homosexual intercourse between the same sexes, man and man or woman and woman. Now, without taking a poll, some of you, even today, 2017, might think that sodomy is wrong. That is your moral compass. That is your individual view of what is right and what's wrong. 50 years ago, that same attitude towards sodomy, i.e. being wrong, was also the ethical standard. 50 years ago. So what is ethics? Ethics is again this idea of right and wrong, but as an external standard, as the standard imposed on the individual by the majority in society. So if society thinks that sodomy is wrong, that was the ethical standard. And because it was the ethical standard, over time, with a delay, that ethical standard becomes the legal standard. So, 50 years ago, we had in fact a crime called sodomy. Now, come to 2017, or even much earlier than that, you'll find that we removed that crime. Why do you think we did that? What happened? Why did we decide to declassify sodomy as a crime? Yes, but again, who drives that? Change in public opinion, which filters through ethical standards. There's no more the stigma from an ethical standard point of view, from the societal point of view, relating to sodomy. Does that mean that every person's moral compass agrees with that ethical standard? Not necessarily. And that's the difference between morality and ethics. Morality is on the inside. You are in control. You decide for yourself what's right and wrong. But that internal compass is also influenced by the external environment that you live in. And that's what we call the ethical standard. Same-sex marriage. Even today, 2017, in Australia, there is no such thing as same-sex marriage. Again, because the ethical standard has not moved towards that understanding. In other places, for example, the Netherlands, you'll find that they had that already for maybe 2 decades or 3 decades now. But because their ethical standard moved in a different direction, it arrived at the point that they thought that that was not a problem, that was not wrong. Moral standards then, on the aggregate, influence what we have as an ethical standard. The ethical standard is composed of the aggregate, really, of your moral standards, each and every one of you. But also influenced by what's happening in other places. You can think of Mabo. Does anyone remember Mabo? That case that we talked about in relation to recognizing native title in Australia. Why did Australia recognize native title 200 years after we said that this land was a terra nullius? It's a rhetorical question. Why? Because of what was happening overseas, especially changes to the way Canada was acknowledging its First Nations. Again, the point is that we see something that starts as a moral standard and then aggregates into something that is we call ethical standard, internal, external. And that ethical standard over time starts putting pressure through the democratic process on Parliament to enact laws that are in line with these ethical standards. But ethics itself is not law. Vanity is unethical, but it is legal. It could still be immoral. Some of you might think it's moral. All right. Let's go to our second video today.
Year-old Jamel Dunn, his head barely visible, got into deeper and deeper.
Okay.
For water July 9th, 5 teenagers were recording it.
We're not finna help y'all. You finna destroy my evidence.
Bro, drowning, what the heck?
Police say they don't know why Dunn went into the water, but when he did, there was a small group of teens watching from the bank down that way.
Laughed at him, told him that they weren't going to help him, they weren't going to rescue him, and taunted and laughed at him the entire time.
Y'all don't understand. I bet you got in there.
Broke my heart for someone to just sit there of age to know if someone needs help. They're crying out for help on a video and you just do nothing.
Fiancée Ron Danielle Williams was there 5 days later when Dunn's body was finally found.
How could nothing in your heart tell you not to do anything when someone's crying out for help and you're telling them that you're not going to help them?
The state attorney's office released a statement condemning the video, but saying prosecutors could find no law that had been violated. The 5 teens who made and posted the video have been identified and interviewed, but there is no formal punishment. In Cocoa, Dan Billow, WESH 2 News.
All right. Do you need to see this again, or have you? This was on the news yesterday, on 7 News, News at 6. So this was basically 5 teenagers with ages ranging between 14 and 18. And this man was in front of you dying. He was drowning. And he was calling for help. And you saw what they were doing. Okay. The key point is that we were told in this clip that the prosecution cannot do anything. Why? Because there's no law on the books that requires these teenagers to rescue this person. Again, the issue here is the interaction or overlap between what's ethical and what's legal. So in this case, what they did was completely legal. Well, not quite. We'll talk about that. But it was unethical. Do you think it was unethical? Why do you think it was unethical? Someone else. Why do you think it was unethical, please? Yes?
They could have prevented it from happening.
Do you think that they... Someone says they could have prevented this from happening. Now, I've painted this profile of 5 teenagers between the ages of 14 and 18. This is a black man. We don't know if those people are black or not. But do you think that in that circumstance, they would have been able to help this person?
Well, with the 5 of them, it would have been easier to get out there and carry his weight back to shore.
Okay. So he's saying because there are 5 of them, they could have probably picked him up and dragged him back to shore. Any other way they could have helped this person?
You there?
Yes, I'm here.
Yeah, they could have called the authorities if they didn't feel confident saving them themselves and putting themselves at risk. Police, ambulance, all that stuff to try and potentially save that man instead of recording and taunting him.
All right. So someone says, maybe it's not that difficult. You don't have to jump into the water. You know, you have already a smartphone. We can tell you have a smartphone, right? Why don't you just call the police? Wouldn't that be enough to help this person? They did not. Come again? They have no morals. Okay. What can we do about that in society? So, they said, there's nothing we can do as a prosecution. Do you agree?
Yes, sadly.
Yes, sadly. Anyone disagrees? Tim? Tim says, I disagree. Why do you disagree?
Because the majority would say that it's unethical, so the majority could create a law that would condemn that.
Okay. So, Tim is saying, ethical standard. Do we agree as a majority here that this was wrong? Okay. So if you elect your representatives to parliament, over time, you might see that they will pass a law that says you cannot do this anymore. What about the here and now? Do you believe that we should be able to find something in our legal systems that can catch these people, that can find them guilty? And yes? Someone online? All right. The answer is yes. And you shouldn't be surprised. You can still do something about this. And you do it through the Coroner's Act of 2003 in Queensland. Section 7 of that act says that you have to report a reportable death. So you have to build your arguments around whether this is reportable death or not and so on, but you can still find them in breach of that section and hence impose a sanction on them. It's not going to be imprisonment, but maybe a fine. But something to show that this is not right. But the point I want to make is that you don't have complete overlap between what's ethical and what is legal. Sometimes something could be unethical, just like this, but you can't do anything about it. And why is that? Why do you think that there are things like vanity or failing to rescue? Why are they not on the books? Why are they not laws? Let me just first tell you something. In some jurisdictions, not in Australia and not in Florida, there's something called the duty to rescue. The duty to rescue. And there are a good number of jurisdictions that already impose that duty of rescue. Not in Australia. Why not? So let's go back and ask, what impacts or drives or influences our ethical standards? Upbringing? Sorry? Culture? Society? Religion? So you don't expect that all jurisdictions or all countries are going to have the same laws because they don't have the same ethical standards. Except, of course, when it comes to globalization and economic integration. You're supposed to park all of that aside and have the same rules and regulations in relation to business. What do you think about that? Should business be also influenced by our religion, our culture, our upbringing, or should it be influenced by the WTO? Anyone? So what's happening is that it's influenced by something external to Australia. Why is that? Again, because of efficiency. The thing I'm trying to drive here is that laws, even though we like to think are driven by higher moral standards, driven by our upbringing and our culture and our civilization, sometimes, most of the time, especially when it really matters, laws are very basic. They are driven by cold efficiency calculus. What is efficient and what is not efficient. Although, of course, some people disagree and they start advocating for a difference, advocating for a different type of legal system. Unfortunately, those people still are in the minority in most Western countries. As you can see, when you talk about law, it will take you anywhere you want to go because it's that complex. So we have to keep bringing it back because this is just an introduction. Let's talk about, again, the relationship between law and morality. We will emphasize in our tutorial today, again, this idea of elements. You remember this definition from chapter 1, and then we talked about it as well in chapter 29, and now we will talk about it again in terms of its elements. What is law? So the elements are, it's a set of rules developed over a long period of time, regulating people's interactions. In other words, it regulates people's behavior. And how do you regulate people's behavior? If I want to write a law, if I want to create a set of rules that regulate people's behavior, what am I going to use? What do I use to create a set of rules? A C+ computer program? Fuzzy logic? Yeah, but what do I use? What's the instrument I use? How do I create the set of rules? When you see laws, what do they look like? They are created using language. Yes? Actually now we use plain English, not even Latin phrases. Plain English language to create set of rules. Yes? If I want to regulate behavior, what kind of word do I use? Behavior requires what words? Words of action. We call them, what kind of words create actions? Sorry? Verbs. Thank you. So when you go looking for something to get elements, remember that we regulate behavior using verbs. Sell or not to sell. It's an offense to sell. It's an offense to provide, okay? To stop in a traffic accident. It's all about verbs. When you go looking for elements, remember, we regulate this behavior using verbs. And using these verbs, we set standards of conduct. Again, relating to behavior, whether between ourselves in society or ourselves and the state. And of course, as we said, the most important point is that these are enforceable through sanction. So you'll find that organizations use something called codes of conduct. Codes of conduct. How do you think these codes of conduct are different from sanctions? Are different from law? Well, they're different because of the sanction that backs their implementation. This university, for example, has a code of conduct. It has even a student code of conduct, which is what? Which is a set of rules to regulate people's interactions within this organization and between this organization and the community. It sets standards of conduct. That's why it's called a code of conduct. But it's not enforceable through sanction. In what sense? Well, of course, the university or any other organization has certain possibility of imposing sanctions in terms of disciplinary action. But that's not the sanction we talk about here. This sanction is backed by the state. It's backed by the police. Okay? So ethics has a lot of things in common with the law, but the state will not intervene. Just like we saw in that Dunn movie, Dunn video clip, when this person died and no one helped. It's unethical, but there's no sanction. The government cannot intervene. Okay, just to rehash, morals and ethics. Morals are concerned with the distinction between right and wrong. This is your compass, internal to you. Ethics relate to morals, to the treatment of moral questions and acting in a morally correct and honorable way. Who decides what's morally correct and honorable way? Society. Morals are going to be your framework of thinking. That's what you think. But when it comes to acting, it starts now to move into the sphere of ethics. Because acting is going to influence not just only yourself, but the people in this society. So we need to go beyond self-interest. Self-interest being the crux of vanity. An ethical judgment is one that can be seen to apply to everyone in similar circumstances and not only to a particular individual. An ethical judgment is one that can be seen to apply to everyone in similar circumstances and not only to a particular individual. Does this remind you of any legal doctrines that we talked about in the week past, or maybe the week before that? The doctrine of, yes? Human rights, but we didn't talk about human rights. We talked about something called the doctrine of, someone said it, precedent. The doctrine of precedent. Do you see the similarity between what I'm talking about here and the doctrine of precedent? The doctrine of precedent said what? We treat similar cases similarly. When you have the same set of facts, you are expected to come with the same answer, with the same decision. So at the crux of that doctrine, legal doctrine of precedent, is an ethical judgment. Let's talk about some theories of ethics. Just like there are theories of law, there are theories of ethics. Now, depending on which one of these theories of ethics influences your morality, you will act different to the person sitting next to you. Now also remember that people use what we call in game theory, I know you haven't done game theory, but it's called mixed strategies. So people will not always use one theory of ethics. They might change the theory that they think is appropriate depending on the circumstances. So similar to what we'll talk about here called relativism. All right, the first theory looks at the consequences. Consequentialism. This is from England, from a guy called Bentham, who said, like efficiency, the consequence, who said that what is moral depends on the consequence. Have you seen the movie Inferno? It's a recent one. Inferno with Tom Hanks. Anyone? So this was about a billionaire who wanted to devise some sort of a virus to kill or to cull humanity. So the idea was there is surplus humanity, and because of that we are killing the earth. Ethical judgment. So we have to get rid of as many people as we can. Based on this theory, was that conduct ethical? Does the end justify the means? I'm going to kill billions, but to save the planet and to save this planet for future generations. That's a very noble goal. I can send people to the Shoah like they did with the Jews because I want to save, I'm Jewish, it's okay, I can talk about this, because they want to make Germany better. The end justifies the means. Why not? That's one legal theory, and you can see the dangers from this theory. So we come to this theory that looks at the duties, the ontology. The ont means that it's necessary. It's ethical if it's necessary, in a sense that it is a duty. Regardless of the consequences, what do you have to do? So this is at odds with consequentialism, because it says that the consequences, the ends, can never justify the means. Then there is the Aristotle approach. That was the German approach, the ontology, Immanuel Kant. This one is Aristotle, much earlier. And it relates to personal qualities. As a moral person, what qualities, what personal traits should you have? I'm not going to delve too much into this. Just remember that you can always argue that this idea of virtue has a lot in common with what we call justice. Or, if you want to talk about it in terms of economics, it is what we call equilibrium. So virtue is between two extremes. So as a virtue, something is a virtue if it keeps you away from extremes. All right. Then we have probably the most powerful one of these theories, simply because we live more and more in a complex society, in a complex world, which says that there is no one standard. What is moral and what's ethical depends on where you are, depends on the time, depends on the place, depends on the environment. So it's very normal and very natural for us to find that same-sex marriage can be legal in one place based on our ethical considerations and illegal in another place. Of course, there's diffusion. There's diffusion. So the environment is impacting on different jurisdictions over time. But we say that it can differ depending on culture, society, and even on your individual beliefs. So it says that when you go and do business in a place like Asia, without calling a certain country, you might find that they have different ethical standards for doing business than, say, in Sweden. So you go to deal with Volvo in Sweden, you'll find that they do business and they have ethical standards very different from the people who own that company if you go and do business with them in China. Is that right or wrong? There is no right or wrong. It's just ethical or moral relativism. You adjust or you don't adjust. All right. So let's talk about some of the ethical issues that would arise in a business context. We're not going to cover all of these. I'm going to focus in some more detail in the tutorial on this unconscionable contracts idea, which is the third bullet from the bottom. But I'm sure you've heard of many other things like insider trading. I will talk about that in a minute when we look at Enron. Has anyone heard of Enron? Yeah, some people have heard of Enron. We'll look at Enron again. Giving and receiving gifts. Like Donald Trump. Giving and receiving gifts. And what could arise out of that in relation to ethical issues, not necessarily legal sanctions. And then the idea of social utility, conflict of interest, misuse. I think that's straightforward, of limited liability of companies. Do you know what that means? We said that companies are legal persons. They are not physical, natural persons, but they are legal persons in the sense that we created this person through law. And we said that this person can do anything that a physical person can do in terms of, for example, contracting. A company can contract on its behalf. And then its liability is going to be the liability of the company, not the liability of, for example, the directors or the mind of that company. And that's why people love this, because now, which is of course a Dutch invention at the beginning, but they liked it because they don't have to worry about the money they dropped into that company, which we call shares. If this company goes down, the only exposure you have is the amount of money you've paid in equity. You don't have to worry about them coming and taking your home, taking your car, taking whatever you own, because they have to pay the creditors. As a shareholder, your responsibility is limited. Your liability is limited. But of course, like everything else in law, you can pierce the veil of limited liability. So you can go after the directors of the company and you can go after them personally under certain circumstances. We've heard about tax evasion, tax havens, especially in Australia, and what the government is already doing to try and stop people making money in Australia, not paying taxes in Australia. All right. So let's look at more ethical standards in relation to corporations. Is the University of Southern Queensland a corporation? Yes? No? Maybe? It is. Someone says it is. And it was created by an act of the Queensland Parliament. This corporation, why is it corporation? Because it's incorporated. So there's something called the University of Southern Queensland Act of 1998. So we can talk about corporations in the context of what we live in, this institution. All right, it says sometimes, and I'm not saying this institution, I say sometimes corporations in general might end up with something called institutionalized wrongdoing. And this is unethical behavior and illegal actions are often the result of social forces within an organization. We're talking about unethical, not unmoral. So we're talking about an external standard, in particular the corporation or the institution's culture, as we will see with Enron. Unethical behavior because of pressure on the individual. Like what? Maybe you trade for this corporation. I, in a previous life, used to trade for a corporation in what's known as the instantaneous electricity market, just when Enron went bankrupt. And there's an expectation on you as part of what they call your development plan or annual review that, for example, if you have made $1 million in profits this year, they expect you to have that increased by 10% next year, or 20%, or 50%. And they don't care usually, no, not usually, but sometimes they don't care how you do it, in the sense that it is your responsibility. You have the discretion as the professional to know how to do that within the applicable legal frameworks. But, as it says, corporations sometimes become committed to certain courses of action. A corporation, for example, is suspected of certain wrongdoing, breaking the law, or something unethical, like maybe producing in one of the third world country sweatshops. Instead of backing and admitting and moving in a different direction, again because the transaction costs involved from an economic perspective, they decide to maintain the same course of action. So they might deny, and you'll find even sovereign countries, like states, follow the same rationale. Okay? And individuals responsible for this course of action, like the heads of this corporation, will become reluctant to change their course of action. So they become, if you like, personally committed to this wrongdoing. It's not about the company or about ethics or right or wrong anymore. It's about them. They feel that if they change or admit, they're going to lose their career, or they might, for example, be facing some sort of a disciplinary action or whatever it is. Okay? And because of that continuation, these ethical problems become more pronounced. They become apparent. They leak to the press, and so on and so forth. So in a way to combat this problem with wrongdoing, they talk about organizational integrity. So they say, so many organizations are quick to deny that a corporation should bear responsibility for the actions of an individual, even an employee. They will describe the wrongful act as an isolated incident perpetrated by an individual without the knowledge or consent of the corporation. There is no culture of wrongdoing. It's just this person, and we're just going to get rid of him. Or why? Because it's cheaper to do that. However, unethical business practices usually involve the cooperation of others in this corporation and reflects the values, beliefs, and behavior patterns of the corporation's operating culture. So one of the ways they try to combat that is what they call organizational integrity, and what it really means is that you will have self-regulation. As a person with integrity, I don't have to supervise what you're doing, like they do, for example, in McDonald's, where you have those CCTV cameras all the time on the cashier, if you've worked at a McDonald's. They think you can self-regulate. I don't have to put those CCTVs on you. I know that you will do the right thing. Sometimes there are CCTVs and still there's no self-regulation. All right. So they institute things like integrity programs. They talk about ethical values. There's a code of conduct. And there's also not just the code of conduct, because that's not enough. They try to enforce it through internal audits and things that can give us more assurance of compliance and transparency and accountability. Let's look at what's happening, for example, here at this institution. Let's look at our values at USQ. You should be familiar with these because this is where you live, or will be living at least for the next 3 years. We have 3 ethical values that define who we are. The first one is called respect. It says we respect each other and value diversity of people, culture, and ideas within USQ's community. So what does it mean that we respect each other? What do I mean when I say I respect you, for example? What does that mean? I respect this person. Okay, so it's the idea of harm. You try not to harm them. What else? Can you enlarge that? So respect has to invoke the idea of what? Yes? Safety, not to harm them, and most importantly, rights. When I respect you, I'm not going to violate your rights, at least willingly, willfully. And you are going to reciprocate, it's two-way, by respecting my rights. So, when I respect people, I'm cognizant I'm aware of my rights, but also of these people's rights. Respect is about rights. And it explains to you what this means. Then they talk about integrity. We just saw that people, organizations, institute these integrity programs. One of our ethical values at USQ is integrity. In all we do, we apply and expect the highest personal, professional, and ethical standards. Together, we act with transparency, consistency, and fairness. Okay? It really boils down to that idea of self-regulation. And we also have the third of our values, which is excellence. Through expertise, innovation, and creativity, we work together to excel in all that we do as a university community. Now, there are also, as I said, important things to know in relation to the code of conduct, but for you, you probably are more interested or have to be more aware of the student code of conduct. What do you expect to see in a code of conduct? We said it's a set of rules, right? It's a set of rules. Actually, it's more. So you'll find that it talks about the purpose, the scope, all of that, and then it comes to principles. Not just rules, but principles of wider applicability. Are these legal principles? No, this is a code of conduct. It is ethical principles. This is what applies to your students, yeah? Excuse me. You want to make sure that you are familiar with this, yeah? Especially if this is your first year here. The first is the obligation of personal responsibility. You are personally responsible. You're adults now. Okay? So you need to make sure that you read and comply with enrollment conditions, read and comply with program and course requirements, take responsibility for your own education, monitor their academic progress, and raise issues of concern. Second principle, obligation to act with honesty and integrity. Obligation of respect and fairness. Obligation to ensure safety and to respect property. And maintain USQ's reputation. Okay? That's what you would have in things like codes of conduct. You'll graduate hopefully from here and go to work somewhere, especially if it's not an SME, small, medium enterprise. You go work for the government or go work for large organizations. Everyone has something like this. It means nothing if you are not enforcing these codes of conduct through internal audits, through compliance, and through accountability. So you see that they talk about these things after that. All right. Let's look at some of the ethical issues relating to business activity. In a nutshell, we want to talk about something called ethical investing. So, if you are someone who trades in shares, you buy shares, okay? Some people are very sensitive to what this corporation does. So there are certain things that they would invest in and certain things they would not invest in. So positive factors where they would like to invest would be something like this corporation is active in environmental protection. It has very high standards on pollution control, conservation of resources, ethical employment policies. And there are, of course, countering negative factors, like this corporation is involved in armament. oppressive regimes. You want to know about oppressive regimes? Go to Africa. And you will be amazed what kind of corporations work in Africa under oppressive regimes. There was a movie called Blood Diamond. Has anyone seen that? Blood Diamond? Yeah? Yeah, that's what we're talking about. Environmentally damaging practices, unethical employment practices, like nepotism, for example, or different standards for promotion. Other negative factors: animal exploitation, tobacco or alcohol, gambling, and pornography. So, there's also this idea of ethical professional advice. So you'll find that a lot of entrepreneurs lack the understanding in relation to the legal system and what they need to do, even in things relating to accounting and so on, taxation. So you need professionals to help you navigate what's going on. Okay? What happens usually is that if things go wrong, all of a sudden, all of those professional lawyers and accountants disappear. There are exceptions, like, for example, in relation to Enron. Anderson, I think it was. There were four accounting firms, and then one of them was involved with Enron. After the fiasco of Enron, that fourth large accounting firm disappeared. I think it was called Anderson. Let's look at McCabe, but let's look at Enron first. And we'll try to figure out why Enron happened from an ethical perspective and whether it could happen again.
It had taken Enron 16 years to go from about 10 billion of assets to 65 billion of assets. It took them 24 days to go bankrupt.
The fatal flaw at Enron was pride, arrogance, intolerance.
Well, look, money you guys stole from those poor grandmothers.
We can add a gazillion dollars to the bottom line.
All right, that sounds fantastic.
Did you convert stock worth $66 million?
I don't know. I netted approximately $100 million.
Enron is a company that deals with everyone with absolute integrity.
Talking about my compensation, and if I step on somebody's throat on the way, that doubles it, well, I'll stomp on the guy's throat.
The other thing about people at Enron is a lot of them were former nerds. You wanted to be the most popular guy on Wall Street, and you were going to do whatever you had to do.
They sought out every loophole they could in order to profit.
The rules weren't quite clear.
They could bury debt, they could bury losses.
An industry that was very reliable for 100 years was all of a sudden turned into a casino.
Those guys could just yank the California economy on its leash whenever they wanted to, and they did it, and they did it, and they did it.
He just steals money from California to the tune of $1 million or two a day.
Can you rephrase that? Could I predict phony energy crisis as a result of deregulation? Yes. Could I predict that Arnold Schwarzenegger would be our governor as a result of deregulation?
Oh, I didn't expect that.
How exactly does Enron make its money?
Accounting doesn't get that creative.
I would like to know if you are on crack.
This is the shredded evidence that came out of Enron.
Everyone was on the bandwagon, and it can happen again.
We are the good guys. We are on the side of angels.
It has evolved to the corporate crime of the century.
All right. So this was a company in the 2005, collapsing in 2007. Around that time frame. Now you've heard them talk about things like, we deal with everybody with utmost integrity. They have an integrity code of conduct. But this happened. Why did it happen? Someone said that it could still happen again. Let's see why.
Enron was the world's biggest and richest company in the late 1990s. Its net value reached $70 billion over the course of a decade and crashed and burned in a single year of savage media coverage and brutal criminal investigations. It's important to understand how individual arrogance, the corporate recklessness, and U.S. greed collaboratively caused the biggest economic scandal of its kind.
Enron was founded in 1985 by Ken Lay as a natural gas company in the Pacific Northwest. Around that time, the energy markets of the U.S. were being deregulated, that is, transitioning from government control to a free market. Lay hired visionary Jeff...
Sorry, I just want to say something right here.
...is transitioning from government control to a free market.
This transition from government control to free market can be traced back again to an economic school of thought, a fresh water school of thought, because it's on a river, in particular at the city of Chicago, the Chicago School of Economics. Again, they are the ones who convinced people like President Reagan that you need to deregulate, in this instance, the electricity markets. Electricity should not be produced by local government. Electricity should be produced by private investors. Why? Because of efficiency. It's more efficient to do so. Let's continue with that.
Lay hired visionary Jeff Skilling, under whose leadership the company moved to Houston in 1990. Enron became a national middleman for the electricity markets in the newly deregulated states. Companies would sell electricity to Enron, who would then sell the electricity to individual customers, charging everyone along the way.
Clipping the ticket.
This innovative approach led to wide critical acclaim for Enron, with many praising its success, including Fortune, which called it most admired, and named it to the top 100 companies to work for. However, this acclaim led to a highly competitive environment within the company. The company's stock price was plastered over the walls of the building. Enron executives...
So again, highly competitive environment. There's a lot of pressure on you as someone who works there.
...created the Performance Review Committee, which periodically graded the company's employees and fired the lowest portion without further consideration. Enron's culture became cutthroat and unforgiving, rewarding those who took risks and bent the rules. As internet companies grew more popular in the late 90s, Enron launched Enron Online, an energy trading e-commerce site, which was largely successful. Enron also used this platform to launch high-speed trading services for bandwidth, advertising, and even weather, although those all failed and put Enron in debt.
Okay, but the idea here and the innovation is that they realized that you can sell anything and everything. The genius, if you think that they are geniuses, the genius of Steve Jobs, you are business students, right? The genius of people like Steve Jobs is, if you think they are geniuses, and people like Bill Gates, is not that they have invented anything. All of that they have used was invented by whom?
Other people, and they're just passing it off.
Whom are these other people?
The workers, the employees?
No, the American Army. It was people like the Pentagon or even NASA that created all of these new developments that they ended up putting together into gadgets like the smartphone. Their genius was marketing. And it's the same idea running here. These people believe that I can sell you anything. You must have heard that in some countries they are trying to privatize water, like in Peru or somewhere in South America. They want to sell you water. They're already selling you water. No? And very expensive water. I can sell you air. I can sell you oxygen. I can sell you your own blood. That's what's happening here. Everything can be bought and sold in a market, preferably on the internet.
However, Enron was able to write these losses off as gains by using a new system called mark-to-market accounting.
Mark-to-market.
With traditional accounting, a company is valued off of its past transactions. With mark-to-market accounting, companies are valued based on the present and on future potential. Enron abused it and recorded profits from recently signed contracts and recently built factories, even though they were not actually returning profit yet. In addition to false...
Sorry. This mark-to-market, is that illegal? No, it's not. Is it unethical? So what they were doing is hiding their losses. So what? So if you buy the share, you think, of course, when you buy the share, you will look at the profitability, and the profitability is still high because they are able to hide the losses. So it's unethical, I would say, but at that time it was not illegal. Later, after the collapse, they changed.
Falsifying their accounts, Enron CFO Andy Fastow created special purpose entities to hide Enron's failures. These were mini companies that would essentially buy Enron's liabilities and debt, thus removing them from Enron's books. LJM, one of the many SPEs, was run by Fastow and had over 96 major U.S. banks and firms investing in it. Since Fastow was solely in charge of this, he was able to get away with skimming money off of each transaction, totaling over $30 million in profits for himself over time. Additionally, Enron manipulated the energy market to earn money at immense cost to others. Starting in late 2000, Enron would purchase electricity futures and then periodically shut down power plants in California. The widespread power outage...
Okay. So Enron, as you saw, was a retailer, electricity retailer. There's a generator and there is a consumer, you. Between them, there's a retailer. I used to work for one in Auckland called Vector Limited. I used to do the same thing. I used to sell electricity for them. But I didn't do this kind of stuff. So what are they doing? They are taking out, you know that the transmission grid, there are transmission lines, and then those transmission lines will go into lower levels of voltage until they come to your house. But these lines are connected to certain power plants. If you take that power plant out, for example, for maintenance, then you have to get the electricity from somewhere else. But now you created more demand because there's less supply. Do you understand? So now you can charge more for that electricity. Why would you want to take that plant out? Or when you would want to take that plant out? You will take it in the peak summer days. Because the capacity of the system is already high. You're reaching full capacity. Now I take that out, so people are going to start vying on the available electricity. Some people will have to go blackouts. And that's what they were doing.
Outages caused the futures to increase in value, which Enron then sold for a profit. Throughout the late 90s, Enron used these methods to record astounding revenue, and its stock price continued to rise. By late 2000, top executives at Enron, including Lay, Fastow, and Skilling, saw the company's losses and failures and sold their respective stocks, cashing in millions simultaneously. Lay would continue...
So, this is an instant of insider trading. Because they know what they're doing, they know sooner or later those prices are going to come down. So, they bumped up the prices through these actions, they sold the stock at that price point and let it then drop. The problem, of course, these guys get remuneration in the form of options. So they get stocks as remuneration. And they get a lot of stocks. So you can't just go and sell all of your stocks in one transaction. So you have to do it in tranches and you have to do it over a long period of time. But that's exactly what was going on.
Continuously assured the investors that everything was fine and that investing in Enron was a good idea. Yet Enron's stock started to fall anyway. Top analysts began to doubt the quality and legitimacy of Enron's transactions, and a Fortune reporter by the name of Bethany McLean published an article questioning the value of Enron's stock, causing it to drop even farther. As the stock went sub $20, executives continued to cash in their stakes. On November 28, 2001, news of Enron's troubles became public, and the stock quickly plummeted to sub $1. Lay, Skilling, Fastow, and other executives were charged with a smorgasbord of crimes, including fraud, conspiracy, and insider trading.
However, there are more questions to ask than were answered by the court case. Were the executives making moral decisions? Whose fault was it, the individuals, the company culture, or the system of capitalism as a whole? What were the more nuanced causes of Enron's failure? Throughout Enron's history, Lay hired people who were willing to take risks and toe the line. The people he formed his team with, Skilling, Fastow, and Moore, were only concerned with making money and nourished a cutthroat survival of the fittest culture that encouraged employees to break the law. Skilling created a wild, risk-taking environment by often taking dirt biking and racing trips in exotic, far-out places. More often than not, the men were hospitalized for near-fatal injuries from collisions and crashes. These stories became urban legends at Enron, and the team of men were soon idolized as macho men who knew no limits. Recklessness and risky behavior began to be seen as a positive and led to an unhealthy company culture. The culture created by the executives led to incredibly immoral decisions by many of the lower-tier employees. Employees on the Enron trading floor caused the massive California blackouts in late 2000, yet another example of risky and reckless behavior incentivized by Lay and Skilling. Perhaps most interesting, however, is the involvement of other U.S. corporations and banks in all of this drama. Enron had connections with hundreds of major corporations that made Enron's most diabolical lies and schemes possible. Arthur Andersen, a highly regarded auditing corporation, was tasked with reviewing and validating all of Enron's books and records. Instead, Andersen covered up Enron's mistakes and was later charged with obstruction of justice for shredding and burning Enron's most criminalizing documents, and soon dissolved. All told, the question, who should we blame?
Sorry. Again, we go back to the Anderson story here. What they were doing is shredding evidence. So there are official documents, and they were shredding those documents so that there would be nothing left if someone comes and tries to do an audit, for example.
Does not have a simple answer. Enron's top executives were certainly corrupt and contributed to the company's fall. Yet so many other people and entities had a role in causing it. Lay, Skilling, and Fastow were encouraged by the market's competitive, profit-focused, and immoral environment, and all perpetrated these ideals within Enron. The individuals, the company's culture, and the systematic problems of the U.S. market all played a part in this monumental scandal.
All right. Okay.
All I do is win, win, win.
Okay. So the same thing can be seen, this idea of shredding evidence, in this case of McCabe. Okay? Again, the idea was a problem with disclosure. This was against a tobacco company, tobacco being an ethical investing. Yeah. So this company is involved in unethical behavior. But they wanted to prove that they also were negligent because they knew that their product would cause cancer, but they did not tell their consumers. This, I'm not going to go through it in much more detail, but you can find it on page 121. The key point is that first McCabe won, then the company won on appeal. It never went to the Supreme Court, the High Court. But this is the key point. If you go online, there's something called the McCabe Center. This is the address. So if you go there, you'll find the latest on this incident or this case, and it tells you the most important thing for our purposes, this piece of information, that the case was finally decided. Look, the case started when? This case was brought in 2002, okay? And it was finally settled out of court almost 10 years later. So hopefully this will also give you an idea of the importance of always looking at things outside litigation. You can spend all that money, 10 years of litigation, and end up having to do something out of court. Look, let's just park it here for now. I will give you 10 minutes. Please come back at 9:35 and we'll start on our tutorial. Thank you.